The elevator slid open on the 42nd floor and breathed out a draft that smelled faintly of toner and old coffee. I stepped into the marble corridor with a paper bag digging into my fingers. Inside were Dorian's favorites: herb-roasted chicken, buttery garlic mash, and a slab of Brooklyn chocolate cake I'd crossed 2 boroughs to fetch. It was 11 p.m. on a Tuesday. My billionaire husband hadn't come home for dinner for the third time this week. I told myself I was being a good wife. I told myself men who built empires worked late. I told myself 5 years of marriage meant something unbreakable, something that could be soothed with warm food and a warmer smile. The glass doors of Hale Lux Holdings were locked, but I had a key. Dorian gave it to me on our first anniversary, pressing the brass into my palm with that soft, dark-eyed look that used to say, "You're my only world," back when I still mattered. Most of the office was dark, an aquarium of glass cubicles and sleeping screens, except for the far corner suite. A strip of light leaked from beneath Dorian's door. His voice carried, rich and amused, the same laugh that once curled in my chest like a private melody. Tonight it tightened my stomach into a hard, trembling knot. I walked the polished hallway slowly, heels clicking, paper bag cooling. His door stood slightly ajar. I should have knocked. I should have called his name. I stood in the shadows instead, breath shallow. The glow from his monitor bathed his jaw in silver. A video call. A woman's silhouette in the reflection of the window. Her voice purred through the speaker, low and syrupy. "Poor Dorian," she cooed. "Did your wife pack you another sweet little lunch with a heart on the napkin?" He chuckled. "Arya thinks grown men need love notes. She means well. Bless her. But honestly," he leaned back. I watched his profile tilt, the ghost of a smirk. "At this point, I'd rather kiss a dog than kiss her. A dog doesn't quiz me about my feelings every 5 minutes." The paper bag slid from my fingers, landed with a soft thud on the carpet. Neither of them heard it. Heat flashed in my face, then drained until everything inside me felt white and humming, like snow under fluorescent lights. The woman laughed. "When are you leaving her then? You keep saying it." "Soon." He didn't hesitate. "I just need to move a few things first. She won't get her hands on my money. Arya's family has nice connections, sure, but she's got nothing else going for her. Once I'm clear, we'll do it properly." I pulled out my phone, thumb shaking only once before I steadied it. I opened voice memos, angled the mic toward the cracked door, and hit record. The little red light bloomed on my screen like a warning. "You think of everything," the woman said, pleased. "I have to, Sable. Her father used to be something, federal forensic guy, Elliot Mercer. He sticks his nose where it doesn't belong. Thankfully, they haven't spoken in years. She's too proud to crawl back to Daddy." True. I hadn't spoken to my father since the day I chose Dorian. Dad called him a serpent in bespoke wool. I called Dad jealous, controlling. I told him love can't be audited. The call ended with a soft chime. Dorian's chair creaked. He sighed the satisfied sigh of a man who believes the world was built to be stepped on. I backed away from the door like a thief, left the dinner bleeding warmth into the carpet, and walked to the elevator as if guided by rails. In the parking garage, I sat in my car for 20 minutes and stared at the concrete wall. My hands were calm. My heart was not. Something inside me cracked, then caught fire. Not my heart, that had been crumbling for months. Something deeper. The version of me who made herself small so he could feel large. She burned quietly until she was ash. I drove home to the penthouse on 72nd, the one with the floor-to-ceiling windows Dorian insisted on for the view, and I hated for the exposure. I went straight to his study. He didn't know I knew about the book. Third shelf, left side, black linen cover titled Maritime Arbitration. Hollow. Inside, a matte black laptop that wasn't on any insurance policy. He didn't know I watched his hands when he typed. People think love makes you blind. Sometimes it makes you forensic. I opened the laptop. Password prompt. I tried the combinations I'd etched in a private corner of my mind. Dorian plus S? No. Hale Lux 2018? No. Sable 2019? Yes. The pang that followed was quick and mean. I let it pass through. The desktop bloomed with folders named innocuous things. Q1 four-door client, board prep, charity. Beneath them, the blood, Arcadia, Halcyon, Meridian, shells. I dug deeper. Cloud backups synced without prompting. Hubris, meet automatic login. Spreadsheets like labyrinths. Transfers stacked like dominoes. 12 offshore accounts in the Caymans and Malta. Circular invoices. Inflated assets. The kind of polite crime that wears cologne. Within an hour, I had a list. Dates, accounts, counterparties. A timeline grew under my hands like bone knitting after a fracture. Embezzlement from his own subsidiaries disguised as consulting fees. False revenue pumped through straw vendors. Emails to a lawyer labeled contingency planning, in which I was described as the useful facade and, alternately, a liability to be managed. There was a folder titled Insurance that made my vision narrow to a pinpoint. Inside, hundreds of photos of me undressing, me crying into a towel, me sleeping. Time-stamped. He had built a case file from my life, grain by grain, waiting to salt the earth. I copied everything. Thumb drive 1, thumb drive 2, cloud to a private encrypted vault I'd opened under the travel agency I used for our honeymoon. He'd taught me to hide storms. He forgot storms, learned to track pressure. At 2:04 a.m., the front door sighed. Expensive perfume, not mine. The shower ran. He slid into bed facing away, a warm absence at the edge of the mattress. I lay on my back and looked at the ceiling until the white turned into a map. By the time dawn rubbed its eyes, I had a plan, and its edges were sharp. I woke first, as I always had. I ground the coffee beans, plated the omelet. My face in the stainless kettle looked calm. Inside, everything was math and matches. "Morning," Dorian said, coming in with his tie in his hand, undershirt clinging to a body I used to trace like a coastline. He kissed my forehead without seeing me. "Big day. Can you grab my dry cleaning?" Of course. I stirred 2 sugars and a splash of cream into his mug, just how he liked. "Home for dinner?" "Doubtful. Investor thing. Might run late." Translation, Sable. "Okay," I said. "I'll keep something warm." He nodded, eyes on his phone, mouth on autopilot. He didn't notice that I'd been awake since 3. He didn't notice the small tremor that had moved out of my hands and taken up residence in my gaze. Dorian Hale never noticed anything unless it threatened his reflection. When he left, I went back to the study and kept building my case. Bank statements, Slack exports, a draft PR statement from his crisis manager labeled "If Aria Acts Out," in which I was a jealous leech who never contributed to the enterprise of our marriage. A private memo, typed and clinical. If necessary, pursue psychiatric framing. Documentation on file. I sat back and let the anger do what it does best. Focus me. Then I opened a contact card I hadn't touched in 3 years. Dad, Elliot Mercer, retired forensic auditor for the feds. The man who taught me that money is a mirror that shows where the fingerprints are. The man I'd exiled from my wedding reception because he told me a truth I didn't want. Pride put up a hand. Shame nodded along. I pressed call anyway. It rang 4 times. "Aria?" His voice was rasp and caution. "Dad." My voice cracked. "I need help." Silence that wasn't empty. Then, "Where are you?" "Home. Dorian's at the office. For now. I'll be there in 2 hours. Don't tell him I'm coming. Don't tell anyone anything. Can you do that?" "Yes." "Good girl. We'll fix this." The call ended. I stood in the quiet, phone warm in my hand, and felt something I hadn't felt in years push its way to the surface. Not joy, not relief. A hard, clean line of purpose. 2 hours later, Dad stood in Dorian's study with reading glasses halfway down his nose, scanning my hastily built dossier. He looked older, more winter at his temples, more map lines around his eyes. But his brain still clicked like a lock. "This is very good," he said. "Scary good, considering you don't do this for a living." He's arrogant. Arrogance leaves footprints. "Can we use it?" "We can bury him with it," he said. Then the look, the one that weighed cost. "But you need to understand, once we start, there's no neat ending. He will come at you with everything he has, and he has a machine." He already took everything I had, I said. He just left me the dishes to wash. Dad's mouth tugged. Not a smile, something tougher. Then we get you a lawyer who eats men like him for breakfast. Her office sat on the 8th floor of a building that didn't try to look important. No glass sculptures, no brass nameplate. A clean desk, gray file cabinets, walls cluttered with headlines like trophy pelts. Governor convicted, CEO exposed, hedge fund Titan sentenced. Veronica Pike shook my hand with a grip that said, I'm busy. Prove you're worth my time. Mid-40s, cropped hair, eyes like steel rain. Ms. Mercer, she said, motioning us to sit. Your father sent the files. I started reading them and forgot to stop. Your husband is going to prison. The only question is how much we set on fire on the way there. All of it, I said. I want him to lose everything. Then we proceed on 3 fronts: civil, criminal, federal. She ticked them off. Divorce to lock assets, state charges for fraud and embezzlement, federal for wire and securities. We prepare quietly, airtight, then we show the right people exactly where to look. What do you need from me? I asked. Resolve, Veronica said, and performance. You will play the devoted wife until we file. He will get sloppy. He already is. You will collect clean evidence. No entrapment, no stunts, paper, dates, receipts. And Arya? Once this turns public, the narrative will become a war. He'll call you unstable. He'll try to leak those photos to shame you. He'll invent new versions of you and sell them to anyone with a microphone. I understand. No, Veronica said, kind but unsparing. You think you do. When it starts, it will be louder and uglier than you've imagined. Tell me now if you'd rather take a small settlement and walk. I thought of Dorian's laugh, the dog comment, the photos, the files labeled insurance. I thought of the girl I had been 5 years ago, starry and soft and sure. That girl was gone. I owed her the dignity of not wasting her. I'm not walking, I said. I'm building a pyre. Veronica's mouth notched, half approval, half warning. Then let's light it with facts. The next 6 weeks tasted like metal. I woke up beside a man I was turning into a case number. I brewed his coffee, knotted his ties, asked about his day. He grew careless. Late nights bled into dawns. Perfume trailed him like punctuation. He took calls with Sable while I chopped parsley in the kitchen, speaking just soft enough to pretend it was privacy and just loud enough to make sure I heard. I attended dinners, smiled on cue, watched him charm a room while I mapped the cracks, and I documented every charge, every lie, every slip, like the night he told me he had to sleep at the office, and I screen-grabbed the car service receipt to Sable's address. I filled a second phone with dates, screenshots, and a timeline so clean a jury could eat off it. Meanwhile, I planted seeds. There was a man named Marcus Avery who had tried to buy one of Dorian's brands for years. He had shark eyes and a reputation for smelling rot under perfume. At a charity gala, while Dorian basked, I found Marcus at the bar and asked for insights about the luxury sector with the earnestness of a woman desperate to be helpful. I mentioned gently that Dorian seemed tired lately, stretched thin, maybe taking on too much. Marcus's eyes sharpened. What makes you say that? Nothing specific, I said, blinking like the helpful wife. Just, he never sleeps. He took a slow sip. A man like Marcus doesn't believe women who present as experts. He believes his own nose when it twitches. 2 days later, Dorian came home snarling. Avery's sniffing around my numbers, calling my board, stirring up dust. That's awful, I murmured. Can he do that? For asking questions? Yes. He threw back his drink. And no, apparently, maybe, be transparent? Show them there's nothing to worry about. He shot me a look like I had suggested we sell the building for firewood. You don't understand business. He went to his study and slammed the door. Through it, I heard the phrases that had begun to live in our hallways like ghosts. Offshore, counsel, delay, privilege. The next morning, I texted Veronica. He's rattled. She replied, good. 2 weeks. On a Wednesday, my phone buzzed. Veronica. We're ready, she said. I'm filing the SEC complaint this afternoon. Anonymous, detailed. Tomorrow they'll be in his lobby with questions. If he asks you about it, play confused. If anyone official contacts you, you direct them to me. Do not ad-lib. I stood in our kitchen looking at a bowl of lemons and felt my pulse in my gums. Okay. And Aria, she added softer. This is the line. Once we step over it, there is no going back. I crossed the line the night he said he'd rather kiss a dog. 6 hours later, the first domino fell. Dorian burst into the penthouse at 7:18, eyes bright with fury. Did you say anything to anyone? About what? I tucked my phone under a magazine. It had a recording on it. His meeting earlier, where he swore to a junior partner that everything offshore is clean. He wasn't careful anymore. The SEC is sniffing through my books. He could barely form the words. Somebody tipped them. I don't understand. I let my mouth open, let the theater do its work. Isn't that good? You can show them it's a mistake. He laughed, a sound that had lost its charm and kept its edge. You have no idea how anything works. Translation: I cannot show them anything without showing them everything. He spent the night pacing and calling lawyers. In the morning, Hale Luck's stock opened 20% lower. By lunch, the drop widened. The financial blogs used the word irregularities. Dorian tried to push back with soft focus interviews about competitors weaponizing bureaucracy. But the internet had already moved to the next phase: diagnosis. He turned brittle and busy. He started changing passwords, moving money in midnight drips, fielding calls that died when I walked into a room. He didn't see me, not really. He saw the shape of a wife in a kitchen and assumed she held only spoons. A week into the investigation, federal agents seized a set of servers. Subpoenas hit. 2 board members went pale and canceled lunch. A contract with a European brand dissolved for convenience. Dorian's paranoia grew teeth. Someone inside is leaking, he snapped. When I find out who, he never guessed the leak slept 4 feet away. At midnight, after he finally passed out with the TV glowing, I locked myself in the guest bath and recorded a memo for Veronica. He admitted he's worried about fraud charges, I whispered. He didn't say fraud, but he said mistakes that look bad. I have it all. Perfect, she texted back. Send. Also, assets freeze in 48 hours. Be ready. 48 hours later, Dorian was served in the middle of a board meeting, papers thick with civil filings and financial exhibits that read like a crime syllabus. I wasn't home. Veronica had warned me to get out of the blast zone. I checked into a midtown hotel under my mother's maiden name. Dad took the room next door and ordered room service like it was war food. At 10:07, my phone lit with Dorian's name. I watched it ring, then go dark, then light again, over and over, until it felt like a metronome for a song he no longer controlled. I blocked him. At 2 p.m., Veronica held a press conference. She said her client had discovered evidence of fraud and infidelity. She said I was cooperating with authorities. She said the word survivor once and avoided victim entirely. By dinner, the internet had split into factions. Gold digger, some said, timing it for maximum payout. Others had heard the 30-second audio clip Veronica sanctioned, Dorian's voice, crisp as a blade. I'd rather kiss a dog than kiss her. And the chorus flipped. Team Aria trended by midnight. Dorian showed up at the hotel lobby in a suit that looked like it had lost confidence. Security called my room. Mrs. Hale, there's a gentleman. Do not let him up, I said. Then I paused. No, I'll come down. He stood at the desk, hair messy, eyes frantic. For a second, I saw the man who picked flowers from a bodega at midnight and slipped them into a water glass because vases were too formal. Then the second ended. We need to talk, he said, stepping forward. Security moved between us. We don't, I said. It's all already said. You can't do this to me, he hissed. You can't destroy me. I didn't, I said calmly. I just turned on the lights. They're out of context, he sputtered. Those recordings. I was angry. I didn't mean. You meant every syllable. Right up to the dog. He blinked, and for a heartbeat his mask slipped. You know about the photos, he said lower. I know about everything. Security eased him toward the doors. He twisted back, a final snarl. I have lawyers. I have money. I will make your life. You already did, I said. Now it's my turn. The doors breathed him into the street. He stood there for a moment in the hot glare of the marquee, yelling at nobody, then got into a car and was gone. I took the elevator back up with a heart that was too quiet. Dad was pacing when I stepped into the room. "You okay?" he asked. "I'm steady." It surprised me, the truth of it. "You did right," he said. "Sometimes right feels like jumping off a cliff." Ah, I lay awake that night staring at the patterned ceiling. I grieved nothing about him. I grieved her. The Aria who mailed Valentines to her husband in the middle of July and called that romance. The Aria who believed that devotion was proof, that softness would be honored. I let myself say goodbye to her in the shape of the wallpaper's vines. In the morning, 3 of Dorian's partners withdrew from a pending deal. The stock slid again. Sable posted a statement in a whisper font about manipulation and lies. She did not use my name. She used hers a lot. The investigation widened. The words wire fraud appeared in the press. Money laundering flirted with them like a rumor dressed for court. Veronica kept me insulated, a castle of process around a woman who needed to breathe. "The prosecutors will want your testimony," she said. "We'll prepare. And Arya, you're going to win. But winning isn't the same as healing. Be ready for that." I am. It was half bravado, half vow. That afternoon, I signed the last of the affidavits. Veronica slid the papers into a folder, then slid me a card with an address in Brooklyn. "A rental," she said. "Simple. In your name only. Move tonight. Leave the penthouse to the lawyers." I nodded. "Okay. Also," she hesitated, a rare thing. "Sable's attorney reached out. She wants to apologize and help." "No," I said too quickly. "Good," Veronica said. "We don't need her, and you don't owe her absolution." Night folded over Manhattan like velvet. I stood at the hotel window and watched the city move without me. Sirens threading the avenues, cabs blinking, a couple arguing across the street. My phone buzzed with messages from numbers that had called only when my life looked like an invitation. I turned the phone face down. At 3 a.m., I brewed weak coffee in the room's silver kettle and thought about the sentence I had overheard in the blue light of a stolen moment. "I'd rather kiss a dog." In the end, that line had been a gift. Not because it hurt, it did, but because it was unambiguous. Cruelty has a way of clarifying truth. It cut through the years of fog Dorian wrapped around me and showed me the edges of the cage. The lock wasn't even that complicated. I had the keys the whole time. Curiosity, documentation, audacity. By dawn, a new life had budded in the outline of the old one. It was still fragile, but it was mine. And Dorian? Dorian had built his house on mirrors. I was done polishing them. I was starting the fire. I signed the lease on the Brooklyn walk-up under my mother's maiden name and carried 2 suitcases up 3 flights of stairs. The place smelled like paint and pine cleaner. A soft square of morning light lay on the floorboards like a future you could touch. I put my thumb drives in the freezer under a bag of peas, old auditor trick from Dad, and taped a list inside the cabinet door. Accounts frozen, subpoenas served, next steps. When you turn your heart into a case file, you sleep better with checklists. Veronica sent a courier with a prepaid phone and a folder thicker than a wedding album. Inside, the emergency motion to freeze marital assets, a draft petition to divide property, a letter to Hale Lux's board preserving my rights to any equity Dorian had parked in my name without my knowledge. "The story is moving," she said over the burner. "He'll hurl paint at the wall. PR, private investigators, pressure on friends. You keep your head down, collect facts, and let him slip on his own shine." He started slipping immediately. Day 3 after the SEC arrived, Hale Lux announced temporary cooperation. Day 4, a European fragrance house terminated a licensing deal with polite brutality. Day 5, the financial press published a map, anonymous sources, 2 people close to the matter, of Dorian's offshore constellation. They'd found 2 of the shells I'd highlighted. It was working. Pressure in public, precision in private. Sable posted a story to millions of followers, a dim photo of a wine glass and 2 shadows across a restaurant table. The caption, "When a man says he will leave, believe him." The comments devoured her whole, then spat out bones shaped like the word homewrecker. I almost felt pity. Almost. She had chosen a lie and called it love. Now she wanted applause for being fooled by her own applause. Dorian called my old phone 10 times. On the 11th, he tried Dad. Dad let it ring and set the phone face down on the kitchen table of my small apartment like it could catch fire. Let his lawyers talk to Veronica, he said. You talk to no one. No one turned out to include people I thought were friends. A woman from our charity board texted to ask if I would clarify the narrative for a reporter she trusted. A cousin I hadn't seen since college wanted to grab coffee and pray. I deleted messages like I was sweeping glass into a dustpan. On day 6, Veronica took me to the U.S. Attorney's office. Windowless conference room, coffee that tasted like it had been punished for a crime. 2 prosecutors introduced themselves, Huang and Moreno, eyes bright with the thrill of a clean paper trail. Veronica laid out the exhibits with the gentleness of a surgeon placing instruments on a tray. Transfers, emails, vendor contracts that read like a fairy tale, were the Wolf invoices, Little Red Riding Hood for strategic consultation. Ms. Mercer, Huang said, pen poised, in your own words, tell us how you first discovered the financial irregularities. I did. I told them about the hollow book and the laptop, about Sable 2019, about a marriage that had turned me into a witness against my own life. Veronica kicked me under the table whenever I drifted toward anger. Dates, Aria, she reminded softly. Keep us on rails. We built a timeline that clicked into place like teeth. Moreno scrolled through an email thread and whistled. He wrote this from a company account? He thinks rules are suggestions, I said. He thinks suggestions are for other people. They asked about Dorian's board, about his CFO, about a payments platform he used for consultants that had a mailing address shared by a nail salon. They asked about my access to accounts. I told the truth. Joint accounts only. I handled dinner parties and dog-earing catalogs. He handled the rest behind the velvet rope. Dog-earing catalogs? Huang said, half smile. Interior design. He picked the furniture. I circled the pieces he'd already picked. Moreno's smile didn't reach her eyes. Got it. When we were done, Huang leaned back. We'll likely convene a grand jury, he said. We'll need you again. Your testimony is a fulcrum. Veronica answered for me. She'll be here. Outside on Center Street, the air tasted like rain and subway metal. Veronica tucked the folder under her arm. You did well, she said. Clean, steady, devastating. Do I have to testify in front of Dorian? I asked. Not for the grand jury. Later, yes. Trial is theater. We'll rehearse your part until your mouth knows your lines when your brain forgets them. What if I cry? Then you cry, she said. Nothing is more believable than the truth told by a person who survived it. That night I cooked lentils in my new kitchen like a woman who had 1 pot and 2 bowls. Dad sat on the counter, feet swinging like a teenager's, reading The Economist out loud and adding swear words to make me smile. We ate standing up. My phone buzzed. Veronica again. We're filing the asset freeze at 9 a.m., she said. Expect howling. Don't answer knocks. If you see a man with a camera, close the blinds. At 9:11 a.m., a Dorian's Rage found a new register. Public statement, gold serif font on charcoal, posted to every platform money could buy. My wife is a fragile woman manipulated by a disgruntled ex-employee of my company and her embittered father. He dropped Veronica's name, hinted at professional misconduct, and called the SEC inquiry a coordinated smear timed to a contentious divorce. His PR firm fed the statement to morning shows hungry for a fall from grace. Veronica's counterpunch came at 2 p.m. 30 seconds of audio, clipped clean. I'd rather kiss a dog than kiss her. The networks didn't even bleep it. Panelists made sympathetic noises into cameras. By evening, my face was on every chyron with a lower third that used the word brave like an all-purpose balm. I wanted to peel my skin off and sit in my bones until the noise passed. At midnight, my hotel's desk clerk, who now knew me as a nice woman with 2 names and a permanent room, phoned upstairs. Miss Ellis, she said, using the name of my reservation. A Mr. Hale is here requesting. Do not let him up, I said, and hung up gently. Dorian's board called an emergency session the next morning. I didn't need an inside source. The newspapers treated the meeting like a royal death watch. Cameras found old employees willing to say on background that Dorian was intense and results-driven, which is the news way of saying tyrant without getting sued. I imagined him at the long glass table, jaw tight, voice leaning hard on the words temporary, misunderstanding, audit. Imagined the first hairline fractures creeping into his reflection. Marcus Avery called Veronica. I want to buy Hale Lux's legacy assets if the board moves, he said. I'm not the villain here. I'm the undertaker. Tell Ms. Mercer I'll treat the corpse with respect. Respect isn't the word, Veronica said when she relayed it to me. But leverage is, and he's useful leverage. The board didn't move yet. Hubris buys time on credit, but the markets did what markets do when someone opens a choice vein. Hale Lux traded like a sick bird. Analysts went on TV and said, we have concerns. A blogger found the nail salon address and posted a photo of a storefront with a hand-painted sign that said cash only. The internet did the rest. Memes with manicure puns, side-by-sides of yachts and emery boards. Every joke robbed Dorian of a sliver of dignity and converted it into engagement. He texted me from a new number. We need to talk like adults. I blocked him. He emailed, you don't win this way. Come home. We'll settle this quietly. I'll take care of you. I forwarded the email to Veronica and went for a run in Prospect Park that left my lungs burning and my head converted to static. A man walked his dog, an older rescue with a graying muzzle, and the dog licked my hand when I stopped to breathe. I laughed out loud, a sound that felt like a small rebellion against a year's worth of silence. Sable tried again too, a DM from a private account with a name that might have been a perfume or a ghost. I didn't know he was a monster. I'm sorry, can we meet? I typed no and didn't send it. I typed you knew enough and didn't send that either. I closed the app and let the unsent words become what they deserve to be. Smoke. Veronica's scheduled media training I didn't want. You'll be asked to speak, she said, whether you want the spotlight or not. Better to be ready and say no on purpose. A former network anchor spent 2 hours teaching me how to answer a question by answering a different question. Look here, she said, tapping the bridge of my nose, not at the lens. This tells the audience you're human, not a headline. I don't want to be either, I said. Then you be a boundary, she said. Say, I'm not commenting on anything under investigation. I look forward to the truth coming out in court. Practice. I practiced. I hated the way the words felt like furniture you buy because it fits, not because you love it. Day 12, the SEC returned with friends. The FBI logo on the warrant made the lobby of Hale Lux feel like a movie set decorated by my anger. Agents carted out hard drives like loaves. An associate I used to sit beside at charity luncheons texted me a photo from across the street with the caption, "Are you seeing this?" I wrote back, "I hope someone feeds the agents. They look hungry." She didn't respond. The call from the U.S. attorney came 48 hours later. "We'd like to present preliminary evidence to a grand jury next week," Huang said. "Ms. Mercer, we'll need you in the building. You won't testify yet, but you should be available." Veronica had me in her office at 8 a.m. every day that week with a pot of black coffee and a stack of questions that felt like climbing stairs in an old house. Creaking, relentless. "Where were you on October 12th, 2 years ago at 11:43 p.m.? She asked. "Sleeping, probably." Don't say probably. Say to the best of my recollection. Or say, I don't recall. That is a truth, not a dodge. I said it until it became a muscle memory. To the best of my recollection. The phrase tasted like wood shavings. While we built my testimony, Dorian started fixing the barn door with both hands, while the horses tweeted about escape. He sold a yacht. He unloaded a Aspen chalet for a mysterious family trust. He tried to transfer a Picasso to a gallery on loan that happened to be run by a college roommate. Veronica anticipated each move and countered with a motion, a letter, a call that arrived at the registrar 10 minutes before the ink dried on a bad idea. At 2:14 a.m. on a Thursday, my burner rang. I thought it was Dad. His insomnia and mine had learned to dance. It was Dorian. The number flashed unknown. I should have hung up. I listened to the silence that wasn't, to the sound of a man measuring the space between himself and collapse. "Arya," he said finally, and my name in his mouth sounded like a borrowed word. "Don't do this. Think about what you're doing." "I am thinking," I said. "That's the difference. You're destroying a company that feeds thousands of families because you're hurt. We can fix us without burning the house. You set the house on fire, I said quietly. I'm just opening the windows so people can see the flames. Those recordings are your words. He exhaled, a shudder. Then the turn. I made mistakes. The speech from his lawyers had finally reached his throat. Under pressure, some decisions look bad out of context. Let me handle this. I'll put money aside for you. You'll be comfortable. You don't have to work. You never. I do have to work, I said, voice steady. I have to work at living my life. He was quiet long enough for me to hear the hum of whatever hotel he had holed up in while the board changed the locks on the corner office. You won't win, he said softly. And there he was again, the man whose cruelty could sound like a bedtime story. People don't like complicated women. You'll slip. You'll expose yourself. I'll be waiting. Good night, Dorian, I said and hung up on the last lullaby. The grand jury room was colder than anyone admits when they write about justice. You think of mahogany and stained glass. You get fluorescent hum, blank walls, a door that hisses when it opens. I sat outside with Veronica, flipping a pen between my fingers. Huang went in with boxes. He came out without them and with a look that said momentum. 2 hours later, he called my name. You won't speak today, he said, but they wanted to see you. Context. You're real now. That matters. I went in. 23 strangers looked at the woman in the headlines and saw someone in a navy suit holding a sweater like a shield. I looked back and saw a cross-section of a city, an auntie in a pink blouse, a guy with a forearm tattoo of a skyline, a grad student whose eyes darted like birds. I nodded. They nodded back. No one spoke. I left without my knees buckling, and that felt like a victory you can't tweet. Outside, autumn had committed to itself. Leaves had started to go brittle at the edges. Dad met me on the steps with 2 coffees and you did it, I didn't yet believe. We sat on a bench while office workers ate salads from plastic boxes, and a trumpeter played poorly under the courthouse eaves. He looks small today, Dad said. You don't, kiddo. I feel not small, I said. It sounded like kindergarten and crown claiming all at once. News broke that afternoon. The board had voted to place Dorian on administrative leave, pending the outcome of inquiries. He wasn't fired. Men like him don't get fired. They get transitioned. But they took his key card. A photo captured him leaving the building with a banker's box and a jaw that could slice cable. The comments were cruel. I didn't read them. I texted Veronica. Do we send him a cake with a dog on it, or is that unprofessional? She replied with a single emoji, a match. That night, for the first time since my life reversed polarity, I slept through until morning and dreamed nothing I had to outrun. I woke to a voicemail from a number tagged unknown, Newark. Ms. Mercer, the voice said, male, crisp. This is Special Agent Warren with the FBI. We'd like to schedule a recorded interview at your convenience regarding additional information provided by third parties. I forwarded the message to Veronica. Third parties? I asked when she answered. Sable, Veronica said, unsurprised. Of course, I said. She finally wants to be useful. Everyone's useful if you stand them in the right light, Veronica said. We'll take her emails, her texts, and her tears. We'll give the tears to morning television. The rest goes to the evidence table. I stood at my tiny window with a mug and watched a woman across the street water plants on a fire escape like the city would die if her geraniums did. My phone buzzed again. A calendar invite from the U.S. Attorney. My real testimony date, 1 week out. Veronica added a note. We rehearse every day. Wear flats. In between rehearsal and breaths, life tried to stitch itself up. I bought a rug. I stacked 3 books on a milk crate and called it a nightstand. I found a diner that didn't care if I cried into my eggs. I ran into a neighbor in the stairwell and learned her name. Shayna, nurse, 2 kids, 1 cat who ruled them all. And when she called down the hall, "You okay, hon?" I heard myself say, getting there. Once on a Sunday, I reached for my phone to text Dorian a photo of a ridiculous dog in a sweater. The kind of domestic nonsense I used to mistake for intimacy. My finger hovered over nothing. I put the phone down and sent the photo to Dad. He wrote back, 10-10, would kiss, and I laughed. Clean, unarmed laughter that surprised me. The day before my testimony, I sat on Veronica's office couch while she played me. Counselor, she said in a faux baritone that made her paralegal snort, isn't it true your client enjoyed a lavish lifestyle funded by my client's hard work? To the best of my recollection, I said, I enjoyed a lifestyle I believed was funded by legitimate business income. When I learned otherwise, I left. And isn't it true she only discovered these so-called crimes after she discovered an alleged affair, and therefore has motive to lie? I discovered facts in a sequence, I said evenly. The facts exist independent of my feelings about them. Veronica's eyes warmed, a rare weather pattern. Perfect, she said. Let them try to paint you jealous. Jealousy doesn't wire money to Malta. We finished the last run-through at dusk. Veronica capped her pen, stretched, cracked her neck. Tomorrow you walk in and stand on the truth, she said. You've been standing on it for weeks. The courtroom just formalizes the posture. And after, I asked, after the testimony, after the trial, after whatever comes. After, she said, you build a life that owes none of its pleasures to a man who thought you were furniture. I went home by way of the park. The air held that first bite that promises winter without yet keeping it. A city kid tried and failed to launch a kite. His father showed him how, not by lecturing, but by running with the boy until the boy could feel the wind, and the wind could feel him too. It looked like instruction and devotion disguised as play. I stopped and watched until the kite found its line and climbed. Back in my apartment, I opened the freezer, moved the peas, and checked the drives as if they were children sleeping. I poured tea and sat at my little table and wrote myself a note in a hand I barely recognized. You are not burning down your life. You are burning down the theater where he staged a counterfeit version of it. I taped the note to the inside of my closet door, under the hook where a navy suit hung pressed and ready. Morning found me dressed and calm and walking into a courthouse with my lawyer and my father, who had insisted on coming as far as the metal detector. He hugged me at the threshold. We didn't say stay brave or I'm proud, not because it wasn't true, but because we learned some truths live better unspoken, like a hand at the small of your back steadying you up the last 3 stairs. On the stand, the oath tasted like iron and rain. I told the truth. Sometimes I had to rescue it from beneath the wreckage of memory. Sometimes it leapt up whole and bright. The defense tried to make me jealous. I let them, then returned to numbers. They tried to make me complicit. I let them, then returned to dates. They tried to make me small. I refused because I had practiced refusing every day since the dog sentence. When I stepped down, my knees did not fail me. Veronica squeezed my hand once. Sharp. That, she murmured, was a match. Outside, flashes popped like a small, stupid storm. A reporter called, Aria, do you feel vindicated? And I remembered the media training, remembered to look at the bridge of her nose. I'm not commenting on anything under investigation, I said. I look forward to the truth coming out in court. I walked past the microphones and into air that felt suddenly habitable. Somewhere on a screen, a stock ticker hiccuped. Somewhere, a man who thought he was the house realized he had been the bet. I went home and stood at my window and watched Brooklyn be ordinary and miraculous. Garbage truck clanging, a bike courier threading needles, Shayna's cat surveying his realm. I made toast. I called Dad. I texted Veronica a single emoji back. The match she had sent me the day the board took his keycard. She answered with 3 more, a scale, a hammer, a flame. The war wasn't over. Wars like this don't end. They dissolve into sentences and restitution orders, and a story people tell at dinner parties until they forget it wasn't fiction. But a battle had been won, the precise kind that turns empires into ash. And in the quiet that followed, I could finally hear something that had been trying to speak through the noise for months. It was my own life clearing its throat. The verdict did not arrive in a trumpet of triumph. It came like a slow tide turning, each small motion adding up until even the rocks had to admit the sea had changed direction. After my testimony, the prosecutors stacked their blocks with patient hands. Former accountants came forward and confessed to following orders they never felt brave enough to challenge. A junior analyst produced a thumb drive he had once hidden in a shoebox because he thought one day he would need to remember the truth. Sable handed over her phone through her lawyer, and the text threads told a story of promises extended like credit and repaid in contempt. The grand jury returned indictments that were dry on the page and electric in the air. Hale Lux tried to keep breathing. The interim CEO stood behind a podium and said words like continuity and resilience. The board hired a restructuring firm that specializes in teaching companies how to walk with a limp. Vendors renegotiated. 1,000 small arteries constricted, and the patient lived, but it would never run again. The press called it a stunning fall. I called it gravity cashing its check. My life in Brooklyn gathered edges. The rug went down. A bookshelf appeared. I found a morning rhythm, coffee from the corner place that remembered my name, a run that looped past the lake where the same old man fed the same brazen pigeons, a call with Veronica to review the next motion. Dad came over on Sundays with a bag of groceries he pretended was for me, even though my fridge had finally stopped looking like a display. He repaired a wobbly chair with the satisfaction of a man fixing a small thing, because the big things could not be fixed with wood glue. One afternoon, the receptionist at Veronica's firm patched through a call from the U.S. attorney. Huang spoke with crisp satisfaction. The court had set a trial date. He thanked me for the way I had kept my records and for the way I answered questions without trying to make them poetry. Facts, he said, win in rooms like these. You have given us a clean path to walk. I hung up and stared at my little kitchen window while the kettle growled on the stove. Sometimes the way out of a maze is not a secret door. Sometimes it is the act of naming every wall until the walls give up, pretending they are anything but walls. The divorce case moved in parallel. Veronica's civil team filed inventories and countered theatrics with math. They cornered assets that had learned how to skitter. They drafted orders that froze accounts before midnight flights could turn numbers into air. In deposition, Dorian tried to look bored and only managed to look tired. He denied the obvious and swore vague allegiance to words like oversight and delegation. Veronica sat very still while he talked, and then asked questions in a voice that could have sliced satin. Did you sign this? Did you authorize this? Did you tell your counsel to create this trust for the purpose of withholding assets from your spouse? He dodged, and then the document on the table refused to dodge with him, and the stenographer's fingers kept recording the part where paper and voice no longer matched. On a Tuesday morning, the SEC released a civil complaint. The television in the diner played a ribbon of allegations, while a waitress topped off my mug with the absent kindness of a woman who has seen 1,000 storms through plate glass and knows they all end with damp footprints and a floor that needs mopping. Customers looked up from their eggs and made noises that belonged to sports games and disaster footage. I watched my husband become a public cautionary tale and felt the strange emptiness that comes when your private grief puts on a suit and walks across a stage. 2 days later, Marcus Avery called. He wanted to meet. Veronica approved because leverage was leverage, even when it had perfect hair. We chose a hotel lobby where reputations go to adjust their cuffs. Marcus sat with his hands folded like a promise. He would bid on Hale Lux's core, but only if the board accepted the cleanup that comes with buying a legacy soaked in scandal. I told him I had no interest in steering his deal and no appetite for revenge dressed up as charity. He said he respected that, and then he leaned forward and lowered his voice. He told me the truth as he saw it. Dorian was not unique. Men like him believed mirrors were windows and thought they could step through. The only thing that stops them is a woman who refuses to be their reflection. He stood and left me with a card and a sentence I would remember because it felt like both warning and verdict. If you build again, build in daylight. The trial opened on a rainy morning that made the courthouse steps shine like lips. Reporters gathered in a coral reef of umbrellas. Inside, jury selection took 2 days of careful questions about fairness and articles read at breakfast. The prosecutor's opening was a quiet blade. He spoke in short sentences that sounded like measurements. The defense tried to turn Dorian into an overworked genius who had relied on underlings. The jury looked at him with the bland curiosity people reserve for art they do not intend to buy. I testified again. This time the courtroom felt familiar enough that my hands did not begin to shake the moment I said my name. The defense tried to pretend I was a woman scorned. Veronica had warned me not to flinch. I did not. I described documents. I explained timestamps. I held up the story of the money and let the jury see that it had nothing to do with my feelings and everything to do with arithmetic. When I stepped down, I saw a woman in the second row dab at her eyes with a tissue. I do not know if she cried for me or for herself or for the strange relief of watching a lie lose its balance. The government called witnesses for 2 weeks, bankers with careful diction, a compliance officer who looked like he had swallowed a lemon and finally found someone else to blame for the taste, a junior trader who spoke with the unstoppable honesty of a person who has slept badly for months. Sable took the stand in a navy dress that made her look like a penitent and told the story of how love letters become instructions when addressed to a man who wants a secretary who will also applaud. The courtroom rustled when she read a text in which Dorian spelled out the timing of a transfer that matched a hole in a ledger like a key fitting a lock. During breaks, I sat in the corridor with my back against a cool marble column while Veronica reviewed Tomorrow. Dad brought me pretzels and reminded me to chew slowly because adrenaline tries to eat and run. We spoke rarely of the first years of my marriage. It is hard to look at an old photograph when the knowledge you have now turns the light in the picture into a different season. The defense began and felt thin. They produced an expert who insisted that the transactions were industry standard. Huang took him apart by asking him to define the words he had used as if he were teaching a first-year class. They tried to suggest that the offshore structures were tax efficient rather than criminal. Moreno put a chart on a screen that showed dates like a string of lanterns, and the room could see that efficiency had nothing to do with it. In the end, the jury stayed out only long enough to eat one meal. They returned with forms full of boxes checked on the left side. Guilty on fraud, guilty on wire fraud, guilty on money laundering, guilty on conspiracy. Each word landed with the weight of a stone into water. There was no shouting. There was the soft roar of microphones being clipped back onto lapels. There was the faint smell of wet wool. There was Dorian's face old around the eyes. Sentencing was set for November. The weather cooled. Leaves went brittle. I moved through days that alternated between fluorescent and golden. I began to build a life that did not orbit a courtroom clock. I opened a simple website with a single page that said what I needed it to say. Financial clarity for women. Private strategy sessions. Documentation templates. Referrals to counsel. I named it Mercer Clarity because the word consulting felt like a suit that did not fit. The first client found me by way of a friend. She sat on my couch and cried into a paper napkin, and then she stopped crying and took out a pen, and we made a list. The second client emailed at 2 a.m. with a subject line that read, "Please tell me I am not crazy." I told her she was not. I told her where to look. Soon there were more. Veronica referred. A legal aid clinic sent 2 that could not pay, and I took them anyway because the invoice I cared about was not measured in dollars. I learned to read bank statements like they were diaries. Money tells the truth even when people refuse to. I learned to say hard sentences gently. I learned that the feeling in a woman's voice when she realizes she is not crazy is one of the purest sounds in the world. On the morning of sentencing, I put on the same navy suit I had worn to court the first time and rode a quiet elevator with Veronica and my father. The judge read the numbers. 24 years. Restitution that would follow him until the end of his working life. A murmuring fluttered through the gallery and then died. Outside, cameras blinked and questions skittered, and Veronica answered some, while I let silence be my statement. That night I returned to Brooklyn and stood at my window and watched the neighborhood be itself. Someone set a bag of trash beside a can instead of in it, and a neighbor sighed and fixed it with grace. A kid learned to balance on a skateboard and failed and tried again. Shayna's cat slept in a square of light that did not belong to anyone, and therefore belonged to him. I made tea and did not turn on the news. I opened a blank document and began typing a checklist for a client who was coming tomorrow. The first line said, "Start a folder." The second said, "Put your name on the tab." Winter arrived one morning without warning, and everything felt possible in the way things feel possible when your breath fogs and you can see that you are still here. I went to a small bookstore and asked the clerk for a recommendation with a quiet heart, and walked out with a novel that was not about law or money. In the park, a man taught a child to tie a scarf. He did not narrate with pride. He showed and then watched the child try, and then showed again. The lesson landed in me like a light. Some instruction is love that does not need credit. Spring came. Work grew. I began to speak at community centers. I found that telling the truth without theatrics made women lean forward. I saw recognition pass across faces like a shadow and then lift. I learned where to place the chairs so no one had to cry in the front row. I learned that there is a dignity in every room that simply asks to be kept safe. One afternoon, a man sat beside me at a long communal table in a crowded coffee shop and slid a dog-eared book closer to his elbow so my coffee would have a place to stand. He wore a sweater the color of a cold river. He did not look at me until I looked at him. We shared the table in companionable silence until he said he knew who I was, and he thanked me without asking me to perform my story for his curiosity. He told me he taught philosophy to students who were the first in their families to believe a campus library was theirs. We talked for 20 minutes, and then we did not exchange numbers because we were both late for something, and because sometimes the universe insists on serendipity being well-mannered. I found a note under my book when I stood. It said, "I am at the same table most Thursdays," and it included a name, Dominic. I showed up on a Thursday, and he did too. We spoke about small things that were not truly small. He told me about a student who discovered he loved Aristotle and soccer in the same semester. I told him about a client who printed her first bank statement and taped it to her refrigerator as a private declaration of independence. We did not talk about Dorian until week 4, and then I answered his honest question in 3 honest sentences, and he nodded like a person who knows that pain is more true when it is not theatrical. By summer, the clients doubled. I hired an assistant who is better at calendars than anyone I have ever met. Veronica stopped by the office one morning with a box of bagels and said, "Proud is not a word I use loosely." I told her pride looked good on her. Dad sent a photo of a beach he pretends not to like and a caption that said, "This is fine, but the bagels in your burrow are the real ocean." I thought about writing the story down. I did not do it for the headlines. I did not do it to hurt anyone. I did it because women kept asking me how to recognize the moment where trust becomes self-erasure. The book proposal took 2 weeks to write and 2 hours to sell. The first chapter began with a kitchen, a laptop hidden in a book, and the wrong password that taught me to try the one that hurt. The book came out in spring with a cover that did not include my face. I did not want my expression to become a screen on which strangers could project their absolutions. The tour was modest at first and then unruly. Morning shows wanted the soundbite. Podcasts wanted the long road. Community centers wanted a chair and a table, and a stack of handouts that ended with phone numbers that would pick up at midnight. At signings, women hugged me and told me pieces of their lives that fit into 10 seconds and weighed 100 pounds. I listened and wrote website addresses on the inside covers and told them the secret that is no secret. Your sanity is data. Treat it as such. Dominic read the book in 2 nights. He told me he had underlined 3 sentences in pencil. He would not tell me which ones because he thought he knew me well enough to understand that I would try to rewrite them if I knew. He left the book on my counter like a plant that did not need water, only light. Mercer Clarity hired 2 more staff and then 3. We rented a larger office with windows that faced a brick wall covered in ivy and a sky that showed up often enough to be considered reliable. I put a frame page on the wall that listed the dumb ways money hides in plain sight. Shell companies with poetic names. Payments routed through platforms that should never be used for anything other than dog walking. Tiny transfers that add up to a life. Women came in carrying folders they held like shields and left holding a plan. Some returned months later with smiles that made me want to sit down because the power of someone who has reclaimed her own narrative is a weather system. Dorian went to prison. Letters from his counsel arrived occasionally filled with the kind of language that believes adjectives are better than apologies. I let Veronica read them and let the shredder finish the conversation. His legal team filed appeals. They were denied. His photograph appeared once in a tabloid beside a headline that paired his name with a word that had once meant a copy and now meant a humiliation. I did not buy the paper. I did not click the link. I did not let other people's curiosity become my workload. Months later, a journalist emailed that he had been released early to a halfway house because cooperation earns points. I read the line twice and waited for my body to react. It did not. The worst thing had already happened and I had survived it. My safety did not live or die on the status of a man who had mistaken me for furniture. I told Veronica and I told Dad and I told Dominic. They responded with offers to hire more security. I responded with a page from my own book. Clarity is a form of security, So is a life that is not staged on the edge of a cliff. I bought an extra lock for my apartment door anyway, because prudence is not fear. The speaking invitations grew. A women's conference in Chicago asked me to close the first day with a talk about rebuilding. I stood at a podium and spoke without theatrics about the mundane heroism of starting a folder and keeping a log and telling a friend. I talked about the dignified rage that turns into spreadsheets. I told them about the moment you realize that you can both grieve and plan and that there is no hypocrisy in that. The applause felt like rain on a roof. When it ended, I saw him in the back of the ballroom for a second or a whole minute. Dorian, thinner, older, a ghost wearing a suit that no longer believed in him. He did not approach. He left a note under my hotel door later that said the word sorry and meant nothing I could use. I put it in the room's metal trash can and pressed the foot pedal and listened to the lid close like punctuation. I went back to New York and back to my desk, and a woman named Jennifer called and said she had read my book on a flight and had recognized the math in her own kitchen. She cried. I scheduled her for Tuesday and told her what documents to bring. I hung up and felt the heavy joy that comes when purpose and action finally shake hands without flinching. Dominic and I became serious in the way that stands quietly, and then one day you realize the furniture has been rearranged in your heart. We did not move in after a month because we are not adolescents, and we did not announce we were soulmates because words like that feel like fireworks that leave smoke. He came over on Thursdays with a quart of soup from a place that knows how to season patience. I met his students once at a reading where they asked questions that proved someone had taught them to pay attention to what matters. He met my father 3 times before Dad said anything that looked like approval. On the 4th time, he handed Dominic a tackle box and said, "Try not to let her pretend she's not good at resting." They went fishing and told stories I would only hear in snippets, and every snippet had the sound of trust being practiced until it was muscle. The penthouse I used to live in sold to a family that did not care who slept there before. A magazine covered the listing with breathless copy and photos that made the rooms look like the idea of success. I did not hate the buyers. I wanted their children to leave fingerprints on the windows. I wanted someone to spill juice on the pale rug and laugh and clean it up and move on. 2 years after the verdict, a publisher sent me a photograph of a list. My book had taken a place among the bestsellers for the week. I stared at the screen and felt strange, because some part of me still expected to feel like an imposter every time the word success attached itself to my name. Dominic poured coffee and said that the thing you did had changed lives in a measurable way, and this is a small marker the world uses to say thank you. I told him gratitude does not require a list. He said sometimes it is allowed to borrow one. I added a second office downtown, where the elevators smell like warm metal and ambition. I hired a woman who had once worked for a bank that taught her to speak slowly when she wanted to be believed. In our office, she laughed fast and often. We built curricula, workshops on recognizing financial abuse that does not throw plates, modules for shelters about securing documents before a move, trainings for public defenders on how to ask the money questions without shame. At night, I wrote a second book. The first had been about fire. The second was about rebuilding. It had chapters with names like How to Call Your Credit Card Company on a Tuesday and Not Cry, and How to Open a New Bank Account without hearing every old lie in your head at once. It will not win prizes, it will help. In late autumn, I stood in my new living room and looked out at Central Park. My apartment was not as large as the old place, and it felt like a cathedral anyway, because every object had arrived by way of a choice I made without fear. Dad leaned against the kitchen island and told a story about a neighbor who insists on mowing the small swath of lawn at dawn. Dominic chopped herbs and hummed. Someone had sent flowers from a woman in California whose case had settled with a number that paid her mortgage and her peace of mind. The card said 3 words, "I slept well." I put that card on the mantle because some altars need to be built in public. The party for the book was at a small gallery in Chelsea. People who had become friends brought wine and patience for speeches. Veronica spoke and kept it short. Dad spoke and did not cry until the end. I spoke and told the room that almost everything good that had happened since the night I heard the dog sentence had grown out of one unglamorous commitment to reality. I told them that documentation is devotion to the self you will need 3 months from now. I told them that love that requires you to go blind is not love. When the party ended, Dominic and I took a cab home, and he carried the flowers because the vase would not have survived a train. We sat on the couch and did nothing impressive. He looked at me and said he loved me. I told him I could say it back now, without feeling like the word had been borrowed from a language I did not speak. We made plans that were not dramatic. He would move in after his semester ended. We would keep his ugly lamp because it meant something to him, and I would not draft a contract for the lamp because compromise is not failure. Work continued. A woman arrived with a folder of receipts and a face that looked like a storm, and left with a schedule and a breath she had not realized she was holding. A nonprofit in Detroit asked me to speak and paid me in a stack of gratitude letters that I kept in a drawer for days when the internet roared. A television producer asked me to sit on a panel next to a billionaire who had reinvented himself by starting a fund to help the very communities his business had hollowed out. I declined because I have learned there are rooms that do not deserve my oxygen. One morning I saw a news item about Dorian working at a dealership in New Jersey and living in a small apartment near a highway. The headline tried to make it a parable. I did not have room in my day for parables that centered his arc. I wish the desk staff at his building an easy day. I wish the new interns in his old company courage and a better boss. I went to my office because a woman from Queens was waiting with a notebook and a nervous laugh and the kind of determination that makes fresh concrete set. Near the end of a long week, I walked home through the park and passed a woman teaching a girl to ride a bike. They moved slow. The girl's face was all focus and fear, and the mother's voice was soft steel. I am right here. Keep your eyes where you want to go. Pedal. Do not watch your feet. The bike wobbled and caught, and then found its line. The girl yelled with a joy that belonged to every triumph that looks small to a stranger and colossal to the heart that earned it. The mother let go without ceremony. She jogged beside her daughter and grinned like a person who understands that letting go is not abandonment. It is a gift. I went home and sat at my table and opened my calendar. The next day held 3 clients and a dinner with Dad and a movie with Dominic, where no one would be rich or cruel. My phone rang. A new number. A quiet voice. She had read my book. She had seen herself on page 47. She had narrowed down the lies to 4 and needed help naming the 5th. I told her to breathe. I told her to start a folder. I told her to put her name on the tab. I told her to come in on Tuesday and to bring the bank statements with the dates highlighted. She said thank you in a way that made me remember the first night in the parking garage when I sat and watched a wall until it turned into a plan. We hung up. I poured water into a glass and set it beside a vase of flowers that had decided to live longer than expected. The city outside my window kept being itself. A siren sang a block away. Someone on the sidewalk argued about a sandwich. A couple laughed, the kind of laugh that says, both people plan to be kind tomorrow. I looked at the note I had taped inside my closet months ago and smiled because I did not need to read it anymore. I understood it in my bones. I had not burned down my life. I had burned down the theater and saved the person standing on the stage. I had learned to prefer daylight to mirrors. I had learned to build and to teach building. I had learned that a woman can be both quiet and unstoppable. My phone buzzed again. Dominic. He asked if I wanted to meet for tea and a walk under the trees before the leaves surrendered to winter. I said yes. We met at the corner. He took my hand without asking me to explain anything. The light tilted as the sun made peace with the horizon. Somewhere in the city, a man sold newspapers no one reads anymore. Somewhere, a student underlined a sentence that would change how she saw herself. Somewhere, a woman opened a folder and wrote her name on the tab. I chose to keep moving. I chose to keep listening. I chose to keep lighting matches where darkness pretended to be the only option. And when women called, I answered the way I had taught myself to answer. This is Aria. Tell me your story.